There is something that has been sitting quietly at the edges of every season 14 conversation that nobody has fully addressed yet. And it has nothing to do with the fire or Abigail's return or even Nathan and Elizabeth. It has to do with the town itself. With Hope Valley as a living, breathing entity that has been through more in 13 seasons than most fictional communities endure in a lifetime, and with what it means for a place like that to keep choosing to rebuild when every reasonable instinct says the cost is simply too high. Because season 14 isn't just arriving with big character moments and unresolved mysteries, it is arriving at a moment when the very identity of Hope Valley is being quietly but unmistakably questioned. And that question, subtle as it is, may be the most important thing the entire season has to answer. Think about what this town has absorbed over 13 seasons. A mining disaster that took dozens of lives in a single morning, the death of one of its most beloved protectors, economic collapse and political corruption, and the slow, grinding work of rebuilding trust after betrayal. And now, a wildfire that erased an entire neighboring town from the map and left Hope Valley itself standing only by the grace of a shifting wind. At some point, a community has to ask itself whether resilience is a virtue or whether it has simply become a habit, a reflexive response to devastation that substitutes for the harder, more honest question of what all this surviving is actually for. Season 14, with its particular combination of returning figures and unresolved wounds, is positioned to ask that question in a way the show never quite has before. Not loudly, not through dramatic confrontation, but in the quiet, persistent way that, when calls the heart, has always done its most meaningful work. Rosemary's loss of the playhouse is a perfect example of the kind of detail this show uses to carry weight that larger storylines sometimes can't. It would have been easy to treat the destruction of the playhouse as background texture, collateral damage in a bigger story about fire and survival, but Rosemary's connection to that space was personal and hard-won, representing not just a building but an idea she had fought for and believed in and poured herself into. Losing it wasn't just losing a structure, it was losing a vision of what Hope Valley could be. A cultural and creative future for a town that has spent so much of its energy simply surviving. How Rosemary responds to that loss in season 14, whether she rebuilds, reimagines, or quietly grieves and moves on, will say something important about where this community's spirit actually stands after everything season 13 put it through. Lee Coulter's arc is similarly loaded with implications that reach beyond the fire investigation itself. Lee has grown steadily across the seasons from a man of commerce and self-interest into one of the town's most committed and principled leaders. His determination to find answers about the fire's origin is entirely consistent with who he has become, but it also places him in extraordinarily difficult territory. Because the two most likely answers, a grieving, angry man driven to destruction by loss, or two innocent boys whose ordinary afternoon became a catastrophe, are not the kinds of answers that a mayor resolves with a gavel and a town meeting. They are the kinds of answers that demand wisdom, restraint, and a quality of mercy that goes beyond policy or procedure. Lee's ability to hold both justice and compassion in the same hands without crushing one in the grip of the other may be the defining test of his leadership and one of season 14's most quietly compelling character journeys. And then there is Bill Avery, whose role in this story deserves far more attention than it typically receives in the broader fan conversation. Bill has always occupied a unique position in Hope Valley, part of its history in ways that predate almost every other current character, carrying institutional knowledge and a moral compass that has been tested and recalibrated more times than anyone else in town. His read on a Jay McGinty, his understanding of how conflict festers in people who feel dispossessed and ignored, brings a dimension to the fire investigation that goes beyond simple accusation.
That's your face on the wanted posters.
Ain't you smart?
We have to find them.
Nathan!
Bill understands that the line between a man who threatens and a man who acts is crossed in moments of desperation, and he has seen enough of those moments to know that the truth is rarely as clean as anyone wants it to be. His involvement in season 14's central mystery won't just be investigative. It will be philosophical, and the conclusions he reaches may force Hope Valley to confront some uncomfortable truths about what it failed to see coming and why. There is a conversation happening right now inside the When Calls the Heart fandom that goes far deeper than episode speculation and casting announcements. It is a conversation about legacy, about what it means for a show that has been running for over a decade to arrive at a moment where nearly everything it has ever stood for is being simultaneously tested, celebrated, and redefined. Season 14 is not operating in a vacuum. It is arriving at a specific and significant cultural moment for Hallmark as a network, for the faith-based drama genre as a whole, and for an audience that has grown and changed right alongside the characters they have been watching for years. And understanding that context is essential to understanding just how much is truly riding on what Season 14 delivers. Hallmark as a network has been navigating a quietly complicated period of reinvention. The streaming landscape has fundamentally altered how audiences consume the kind of warm, character-driven storytelling that Hallmark built its identity around. Competition is fiercer, attention spans are more fractured, and the pressure to deliver content that feels both emotionally familiar and genuinely fresh has never been more acute. When Calls the Heart has always been Hallmark's crown jewel, the one property that transcends the network's reputation for formulaic comfort viewing and demonstrates what this kind of storytelling can actually achieve when it commits fully to its characters and their emotional truth. Season 14, with its combination of a major returning figure, unresolved high-stakes mysteries, and a central love story approaching its most consequential moment, is precisely the kind of bold, confident programming move that signals a network doubling down on its most valuable asset rather than playing it safe. The decision to greenlight Season 14 before Season 13 had even aired is worth examining more closely because it reveals something important about the strategic thinking behind this renewal. Hallmark didn't wait to see how the Season 13 performed. They didn't hold their breath through the premiere numbers or the social media response before committing to what comes next. They moved forward with conviction, which means the plan for Season 14, including Abigail's return, was already in motion before most fans even knew Season 13 was coming. That kind of institutional confidence in a single property is rare, and it communicates something beyond business strategy. It communicates belief. Belief in the story, belief in the characters, and belief in an audience that has demonstrated season after season that their investment in Hope Valley runs deeper than casual viewership. These are not people who watch When Calls the Heart. These are people who live inside it between episodes, who theorize and analyze and feel genuine emotional stakes in the outcomes of fictional lives. Hallmark knows this, and Season 14 is, among other things, a direct acknowledgement of that relationship. But legacy conversations are never just about the institution. They are always ultimately about the people. And the person whose legacy hangs most visibly over Season 14, beyond even Abigail Stanton, the character, is Lori Loughlin, the human being. Because what is unfolding here is not simply a beloved actress returning to a beloved role. It is something rarer and more complicated than that. It is a public reckoning with grace, with redemption, and with the genuinely difficult question of what second chances look like when they play out not in private but in front of millions of people who have opinions about whether you deserve one. Loughlin's journey from the height of her Hallmark prominence through the scandal, the legal proceedings, the prison sentence, and the long, quiet years of rebuilding her professional life has been watched and judged and debated in ways that most people will never have to experience. And now, stepping back into the most significant role of her television career, she is doing something that requires a particular kind of courage, not the dramatic, cinematic kind. The ordinary, unglamorous kind that simply involves showing up and doing the work and trusting that the work will speak for itself. There is a reason Hallmark chose Abigail Stanton's story.
Do me a favor, call me Danny for the next few minutes.
Go undercover at an over-the-top soiree.
Who are you?
A shady coin dealer.
And I'm your dame.
Story as the vehicle for this return, rather than creating a new character or placing Loughlin in a different project entirely. Abigail has always been the character who demonstrates that surviving the worst thing imaginable does not disqualify you from belonging to something good. that the people who have been through fire, literal or otherwise, are not less worthy of community and love and purpose, but are in fact uniquely equipped to understand what those things actually cost and therefore what they are truly worth. Returning to that character after everything Laughlin has personally experienced doesn't just make narrative sense. It makes a kind of profound, quiet human sense that the best story tell. There is one dimension of season 14 that has received almost no serious attention in the broader conversation, and yet it may quietly turn out to be the most consequential storytelling decision the show has made in years. It is the question of the younger generation, the children of Hope Valley. Because while the adults are carrying the visible, headline-grabbing weight of this season, the children are carrying something far more fragile and far more difficult to resolve cleanly. And in a show that has always understood that communities are not just built by the people currently leading them, but by the ones being quietly shaped in their shadow, what happens to Cooper, Toby, Little Jack, and the other young people of Hope Valley in season 14 may ultimately define what this chapter of the story means more than any other single element. Start with Cooper and Toby because their situation is not just dramatically compelling, it is morally intricate in a way that children's storylines on shows like this rarely attempt. If the theory holds and the evidence the show has laid down points toward it with uncomfortable precision, these two boys are walking through their days carrying the belief that they may have accidentally destroyed an entire town. Not a building, not a field. An entire community of lives, livelihoods, histories, and futures reduced to ash because of something as ordinary and innocent as warming food on a trail. The psychological weight of that for a child is not a plot device. It is a portrait of something genuinely devastating. Guilt at that scale, carried in silence without the emotional vocabulary to process it or the courage to confess it, doesn't stay contained. It seeps into everything. It changes how a child moves through the world, how they relate to the people they love, how they understand their own capacity for harm and for goodness. Cooper's expression when he held his mother after the rescue was not written into the script carelessly. It was placed there as a promise that this story is going somewhere real, and that the show intends to take it seriously. The resolution of that storyline, whenever it comes, will require